So one of the biggest conservation challenges we had was I knew I wanted to raise goats, and I knew when this is when I got started over 10 years ago. I knew I wanted to raise goats, and I wanted to raise them with rotational grazing practices just because the more I learned about this practice, it made sense for us as a farm getting started on many levels. One, the land management practices, how it can be ultimately beneficial for the animals as well, but also from being a beginning farmer, it was also a way for us to operate our farm on low input, lower cost scale, which was really the reality of being a beginning farmer. When we have so much of our income going into land payments, it's just the realities. We have to think about how we manage everything from a holistic standpoint, to make this all work. So, kind of that's the context, but the piece was actually putting it into play. And um, goats can be, depending on how they're raised, it can be tough they can have parasite challenges. And so being able to bring a herd into this type of management style was a transition point and a learning practice, or I'd say a big learning curve for myself, and realizing that just because you have the animals doesn't necessarily mean they're always going to fit into a practice. And as we continued to move into this management style, I realized pretty quick that I needed to be very effective with how we manage our animals on pasture. So that included quicker moves. The research showed us that animals that moved every 1 to 3 days had less parasite issues because of the parasite cycle. This is true for both sheep and goats. So that helped as well too. But I also realized too, as we looked at the future of our herd, that it was really important for me to source future genetics from farms that raise animals in a similar manner that were probably a little bit hardier. I would say the animals we started with, there's nothing wrong with them, but it's just there's the context of how your livestock are raised. They can do well in one situation, but maybe, over time genetically they've developed and worked well in that situation. And we were in a situation where we were trying to shift our animals, how do you say it? Their shift, their environment, which was, is making a shift in how our herd continued to grow and develop in that situation. And so over time, we've continued to develop a hardier, more resistant line of goats. And as I say this, I also recognize that we're working with, there weren't a lot of options in the upper Midwest for us to work with, even as we were learning this. So over time, we've been working at being able to utilize these conservation practices, but also dealing with the realities of how do we make our herd over time fit in these tools and adapt how we're farming, not just the land and the practices, but also kind of working with our livestock to make everything kind of fit in there. And I'll say it's definitely, I think it's probably true of a lot of conservation practices, but with grazing and having animals on pasture, it's definitely a long game. And we're still working on that, but it's been pretty amazing to look back over the last 8-10 years as we've been doing this to see how things have progressed over the time and the things I've learned, but also how I've continued to work and build on my herd as well in that manner.